Well, I have two impulses here. One is to say nobody eats it. That's just a bad fairy tale. But and a lot of people, this is something that sometimes brings people clawing their way out of their seats to get at me. But it goes back to what I said earlier. I think redemption is an act of intellectual apprehension. And I had a professor when I went to college, Joe Tussman, and what he claimed was that intelligence is something that you can teach, that we have been entirely misled to think of intelligence as something innate that you're born with. And he was a teacher, and he seemed to make good on his premise. So what if evil exists, and I'm not sure it does, it is ignorance, which is a Hindu position, avidya, obscuring avidya, ignorance. So I think that there is an obligation to understand. I'm not putting aside the obligation to love and to feel, but those obligations seem to have their defenders everywhere. But there is an obligation to understand. And ignorance is ignorance. It's not a good thing. There's no way it is good to not know something. And I go to Germany and I lecture this stuff, and when I first started going to Europe, I thought, oh, well, this will really be fun. These Europeans, it's a better educational system. They'll know what's up. They don't know what's up. I talk about Otto the Great. They can't place him within 500 years. Generally, the audiences, occasionally someone can. Well, amnesia is a pathology in the individual. If you have an individual who can't account for where they were in 1990, then you need to look into, what was it, a blow on the head, a long drunk? What happened to you? And yet in ourselves, we accept this weird, historyless thing. And it's going to bite us in the ass. It's a cliche to say those who don't learn from history are bound to repeat it. But that's all very fine if you're running around throwing spears and pulling catapults around. But if you have atom bombs, you can't be so stupid. So one of the things that that occurs to me is we human beings come equipped with something called the unconscious mind, discovered by Freud and Jung in Vienna, for us, but apparent throughout history, the unconscious mind. And part of this technological and historical crisis that we're in has to do with the fact that we can no longer afford this luxury. This is fine if you're, as I say, chipping flint or running around howling at the moon. Then you can have an unconscious mind. But a global civilization cannot have an irrational, an out-of-control component driving its social systems and social decisions. So part of what we all have to do is get smarter. And psychedelics, consciousness-expanding drugs, expand consciousness, and so do these technologies. And I think I said to you the little joke about how a computer is simply a drug that you can't swallow. In the future, that won't be true. I mean, the computers of the future will be the size of double-aught capsules or smaller, and they probably will be taken internally and just insert themselves in your tissue and grow gold fibers into your brain systems and interact with you. Well, now, are we talking about a drug or a machine? And the answer is that biology is very machine-like at the microphysical level. You know, the genes are being read, the ribosomes are connecting the proteins together. The whole thing looks rather like a factory of moving mechanical parts. But the databases that are being created and the protocols for moving through them are permission to a new level of intelligence. The internet, I find truly awesome. I mean, when you get in there, I start out from my home in Occidental, and then I ask a question which requires that the internet access the main computer at Shibuya University in southern Tokyo. We're there. If I'm not paying attention, I don't even realize that we are now talking to the university computer there. But then we need a certain image of a certain painting. Well, it turns on, it's online in a database at the Hermitage in St. Petersburg. We're there. And in a session, you know, you may move around the world 10 times. I have an automatic system on my computer at home that goes on in the middle of the night and has a series of key words programmed into it, things I'm interested in. And in the quiet hours of the night, my computer moves from one university data system to another, looking for files and downloading them into my system so that when I get up in the morning, I have these files on screen. I mean, I'm interested in a dying cult in Iran, a religion that's existed for a very long time but is now down to a few hundred people. Well, there's a scholar in Leipzig who is interested in this. There are some people at the UN. We carry on a little interest group. And there are even real Mandayans in our interest group, actual members of this dying religion. It's a special concern of mine, and I'm fairly confident I'm connected up to 90% of the people in the world who care about this, because so few do care. So you build these interest groups. You can expand your eccentricity. It's a tremendous permission for eccentricity and community, because you find the other eccentrics who are into the same weird subset of knowledge that you are. And then the other thing is general knowledge is much more accessible and available. You know, schools have not changed essentially in 200 years. And yet education is the thing which allows us to be democratic societies and to control our industrial policies and make informed decisions. Think of the change that has occurred in society in those 200 years, and people are still going to the little red schoolhouse and sitting at their desks. And I mean, yes, we have playgroup and, you know, indirect lighting, but hardly the revolution that we're looking for. Anything else? I'm just rambling here. Yes.
In terms of language in this internet, is it everybody speaks English?
Basically. I mean that's basically it, and that will be I think that's necessary. And English is clearly at this point, for historical reasons, the richest language in the world. I mean, because it has so many technical subsets and geographical subsets. I mean, you know, England alone, you move through linguistic zones and you can't understand what people are saying, and neither can the Londoners with you, for that matter. And then, you know, you go to India, where English is spoken widely, and that's a whole experience. A one world language seems to me a fairly conservative but necessary thing to put on the agenda.
What sort of breakthrough do you think we can make with virtual reality in education?
In education? Well, for instance, an application for virtual reality that's very big right now is archaeologists have gotten on to this and love it because you can, let's imagine a city like Zebel Chaltun. Was continuously inhabited for 1,500 years. So you just feed in the plans for every 50-year increment, and then you can walk the streets of this city and look at astronomical arrangements, see how at the close of Baktun 8 they apparently destroyed a fortification and moved it 100 feet further west. And so at the University of Pennsylvania, in places where the Maya thing is being pushed hard, they're building up basically a virtual database of the Mayan civilization. And this sounds to me much more exciting than reading about Tikal or poring over maps or even slides and film. To be able to walk through Imperial Tikal on a festival day at the close of Baktun 9 and see the reconstructed friezes and everything. And they're not doing that for education or entertainment. They're doing it as an adjunct to the discipline of archaeology. But it obviously will later be sold into the, quote, education/entertainment market, So that's one use. To me, the exciting thing about virtual reality is that we will be able to show each other our dreams. It's another way of objectifying the soul, what we've been talking about. A child of 5 given a virtual reality toolkit will begin to build their world. And by the time you're 20, your world will be, I don't know, the size of Manhattan. And that's you, that's yours. And nobody can walk those streets without your permission. And if you love someone and you give them permission, they can literally walk into your dreams. Your dreams when you were 5, when you were 10, when you were 15, your fascist phase, your Mozart phase, your, whatever. And that is that 4-dimensional centipede of the soul that I'm talking about. It's not it itself, but it's an imprint of it, a download of it. We will build our dreams and then live in them and share them. And imagine, suppose you want to build a building, and suppose you want it to be 10 stories high. And suppose in the design process you decide that actually it would be better if it was 100 stories high. Imagine what this does to the budget of that building. In virtual reality, 1 0 is what it takes to make the 10-story building a 100-story building. Where it says number of stories, you add 1 0, and suddenly it's 100 stories high. And no muss, no fuss, no zoning commission problems, no material delivery problems, because it's made of light. It's made of mind. A very interesting exercise to do in your own mind is sit down somewhere under a tree and imagine that you could live in any way, in any fashion you wanted, in any environment you wanted. In other words, design your own flying saucer, let's say. Well, at first, if you're like me, at first it's just very nice. It's Italianate modern or something, will hang my favorite Pollock over here. And in other words, at first it's just as if I had won the lottery and like I'm suddenly staggeringly rich, and so I can, but then you say, well, but wait, I can do anything. I don't have to have a Pollock. I could have Pollock. I don't have to. If I want a ceiling 700 feet high, done. 7,000 feet high, done. And then you realize, oh my God, I'm in the imagination. I can have it any way I want. And it's a dizzying prospect. I mean, it's very interesting. Would you have a body? What kind of body would it be? Would you, how would you spend your days? You know, would you build the world's greatest art collection? Or, you know, you could become a bumblebee. You could do anything. And it's such a dizzying thing when it begins to open up in front of you. And then finally you realize that with that kind of power, if you had that kind of power, there is an automatic desire, I think, to begin to pull it in and say, well, I think I'll not wear clothes. I think I'll live in nature. I think I'll, in other words, the stuff obsession falls away when you can have anything, and you begin to find your way back to some kind of bedrock. And I think I've told you, or I've told some of my groups, my vision of a kind of perfect future is a world where everyone is living as Amazon rainforest Indians live, or close to that level. In other words, naked, very little work to do, plenty of food, everybody is sexually comfortable with themselves and everybody else, so forth and so on. And what it looks like is an aboriginal paradise of some kind. But if you displace yourself from the point of view of an exterior observer and step into the body of one of these people in this world, you discover that when you close your eyes, there are menus hanging in space. And by looking, the equivalent of pointing and clicking, you move into a cultural architecture of some sort that is completely virtual. And that's where people spend a lot of their time. This could be done, and this will be done. We do it already, except that the interface, as they say, is very clumsy. You know, you have to sit in an orthopedic chair and stare at a flickering phosphine screen. But these are all just technical details to be worked out. So I think that that this idea of a neo-archaism, an archaic revival, will end with an aboriginal exterior in dynamic balance with a reconstituted earth, but that the interior horizon of transcendence will be a virtual cultural landscape that will be wilder than Blade Runner, more dynamic than Dune, more anything than anything that you can imagine. And we will be living then in the imagination and yet celebrating the body in three-dimensional space. And history will be over then. And we will understand what it means to have history be over, because we will be living the way people lived before the first furrow was plowed.